أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله على محمد وآل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. So this is the fifth session, if my memory serves me well, the fifth session in this holy month of Ramadan, and in the series of the discourses that we're having during this holy month. I want to recap a little bit on some of the points that we touched on in the previous session, in yesterday's session, and inshallah from there look at some other areas that we will inshallah look to discuss. So in yesterday's session we looked at the divine cosmology, and we looked at how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has unfolded this world and brought this world into being from a place of divine love. And it's the most powerful and most potent energy source in creation is divine love. It's from this place where existence, or creation as we know it, has been introduced and unfolded. And we looked at the hadith in relation to this. We also looked at the purpose, our purpose in particular, and why we've been created, and where this has unfolded from. And we mentioned that our purpose is to come to know. Our purpose is to come to an understanding. And we looked at how the world is made of contrasts, and how those contrasts are there to invite us to appreciate and understand, in other words, to come to know. And we also looked at the composition of man, albeit a simple composition of man and not the detailed composition of man, because there are many facets and many dimensions to the human being, and especially within the soul of the human being, which we will perhaps have to discuss at another time. So we mentioned that man is created of three parts in general, that we have the element of us which is the heavy density, which is the physical body. This is the matter element within the human being. And we mentioned that there is the element of the ruh, the spirit of man. And this is the element which is immaterial, the element which is complete transcendence or absolute transcendence. And it lacks any sort of physicality. And we mentioned that there is a barzakh between the two, between dense matter and transcendent matter, if you like, or form. And that is the nafs. So there's an intermediary that brings the two together, without which the soul would not be able to be maintained within the physical body, or maintained within the physical realm. So the nafs is the point where you connect the ruh to the body. And we also mentioned that this nafs, it is the thing that gives us the sense of separation. In English literature, and often in Western literature, the nafs is referred to as the self, or otherwise the ego. And the ego is our sense of separation. It's the element within the human being that allows us to see the contrast, because without this ability to see things separate from ourselves, we would not be able to also have self-preservation, and also would not allow us to be able to see and understand and appreciate the contrasts. So this world of forms is a world of contrasts. And that's why we have different measurements, we have different colors, we have different forms, we have different shapes, we have different bodies. We have tall, we have short, we have fat, we have thin, we have large, we have small, we have long, we have short, we have wide, and so on and so forth. We have all these measurements and all these forms and all the different colors in existence for us to be able to appreciate without, as we mentioned yesterday, without having a sense of tallness. We would not really be able to appreciate what shortness is. If we only had shortness, for instance, then we would not really be able to understand or comprehend what tallness is. It's only by measure of being able to have the contrast of the two that we are able to appreciate this. And so it's from the sense of self that we understand this, because we understand everything in contrast to the self. And therefore we have an identity because we are able to see the other, or we are able to see the self and thereby see the other. Without being able to see the self, we would not be able to see the other. So the conceptualization that we have of the self is what allows us to be able to see the other. So, but at the same time, this sense of separation also creates a psychology of separation within the human being, which results, this is actually the cause of all problems in our lives, and actually all the suffering in our lives is, majority of the time, is because of this sense of separation, because it is separation from the other that causes us to do harm to the other. If we had no sense of the other or sense of self, we would see everything as one. We would not be able to identify a separation between us and the other. And it's because we see the self and the other that we go and do injustice, or we do tyranny, or we do harm to the other, because nobody would want to ever do harm to themselves. No one in their right mind would want to do harm or injustice to themselves if they were to see, whether that's the self that you see within yourself or the self you see in the other. But it's a lack of being able to identify the self in the other which causes us to do harm and injustice to that. So this is the nature of the ego, that it only concerns itself with its own self, with its own self-preservation, and with protecting its own self and protecting its own interests. So this psychology of separation creates a pathology of separation, because as social beings, we are only concerned about our own selves. But there's also an issue with this, and it's a theological problem, which is where I want to take the rest of this discussion, that our sense of seeing the self also allows us, and it affords us the ability, but at a heavy price, to see the self and then also be able to see the other, which is also inclusive with the which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when, upon our inception into this world, when we come into this physical form, we enter the physical body, our entire perception is from this separate self, and from the separate self we then are able to formulate an idea of a creator. And some of us relate to this creator because we have been given proof and evidence for this, or some of us because we observe that there is some kind of higher power operating or orchestrating the world. But it also creates a problem in theology, because it makes us define God within a spatial temporal sort of element. And that is that we, by seeing the self and then seeing the other, or seeing ourselves and seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or God, or the infinite creator, as other than ourselves, we are essentially giving him a time and a place, because when there is an other, we identify that with having a place or time. So this creates a problem in theology, and therefore also the ego mind, which offers us this perception, is what creates us or causes us not to be able to see the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala within us or as part of ourselves. And this is why we fail to experience Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or His presence both within and from without. We know theologically, and we have come to the understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not defined by time or space, that He is outside of these measurements. But initially, when we develop a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and because the ego mind is running the show, and the ego mind has hijacked our thoughts, and it has allowed us or caused us to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as separate, the way we interact with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is from a place of separation. So we see ourselves and we see Allah as separate from us. And therefore even our journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is defined by this and the way you interact. So we see Him as some kind of foreign entity. And so things like experiencing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sometimes becomes an experience which we understand in the mind, or concept which we understand in the mind to begin with. But the more we develop our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more we connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more we reflect on the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the more we begin to appreciate that He is both within and without, and that He is not only this foreign entity, but in fact, more so, He is within us more than we can actually see Him without us. And we know this because we know that the sanctuary where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can be contained is within the heart of the human being. The container or the temple where Allah resides is at the heart of the human being. So if we can bring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala into the presence of our hearts, then our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be defined by way of having Him present within us. And therefore everything which is outside of us becomes complementary of that. So then we begin to see that there is no real separation. In fact, it's all oneness. There is no sense of He is out there and I'm calling upon Him who is out there. That is for someone who is very early on in their journey, who has yet to really reflect deep enough and comprehend the presence of God deep enough and begin to experience the presence of God deep enough, and is still governed by the thinking of the ego mind that does not allow him or her to see and experience Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's presence. And unfortunately, this is one of the reasons why we really have a difficult time in connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because of this, we also have a lack of awareness of the consciousness of the heart. But the more we become evolved within ourselves, and the more we are able to remove the veils that have settled on our hearts because of our ego thinking, the more we're able to connect